What's up, guys? Welcome back to another daily Bible reading snapshot. Today we're looking at 1 Chronicles 20, 21, and 22 here in the Old Testament. Then we're finishing John chapter 10 in the New Testament. But what we see here is the things of David's life are repeated, but sometimes they are repeated with less detail. Sometimes they are repeated with more detail. This happens to be one of the times it's repeated with less detail. So as you read chapter 20, verse 1, it sounds a lot like 2 Samuel 11, if you know that passage. But the problem is 2 Samuel 11 is that passage where David sins with Bathsheba, but here it doesn't include that. It just says that it was the spring in the year, the time when kings were to go out to battle, but Joab led the army and ravaged the country of the Ammonites and besieged Rabbah. But David remained at Jerusalem. And that's all that it says really about what David did. It doesn't include that he committed the worst sin of his life. Why does it not do that? That's a lot of people's question when they look at Chronicles. It says, they ask questions like, well, how come it doesn't say that? Is it covering for David? Is it not telling the truth about David? No, it is telling the truth about David. All this is true. It just leaves out some details. And the purpose of the chronicler is a little bit different than the purpose of 2 Kings. Purpose of Samuel and Kings. Purpose there is to give, I think, a really good complete history and to show the flaws and the good things that they did. This is talking about the good things that David did. It's setting David up as the prototype king, which he was. Just because he sinned doesn't mean he wasn't the prototype king, other than Jesus, of course, in the New Testament. But David was a good king. You wanted to live like David. This portrayal of David is a positive portrayal of David. It doesn't mean that it's not true just because it doesn't include everything. In fact, here is a good example. Everything here is true. It just doesn't include some sinful things that David did while he was at Jerusalem. And I don't want to minimize it by saying some sinful things. It was terrible. And in 2 Samuel, it changes the course of his entire life. But here it says that the Philistines have a certain war after this. And how funny is it? Chapter 20 to 21. It goes all the way from 2 Samuel 11 to 2 Samuel 24. It skips all the bad part of David's life where his sons are killing each other and Absalom and all that. It doesn't include that. It goes straight towards the census that took place at the end of David's life. And it says here that Satan stood against Israel and incited David to number the people. Interesting, because what you see there is this was a temptation from Satan. Samuel does not include that in the same way that Chronicles does. It says that David was tempted and he fell, but this says Satan tempted him. So this is an intense temptation that he goes through, and he falls. He falls to this fear of man mentality where he just needs to number his army because he needs to make sure all of his bases are covered. But in fact, the ironic thing is he's got 1.1 million men who draw the sword, and the problem is he loses 70,000 men, which is the same number as we get in 2 Samuel 24. But the same thing happens afterwards. This is a retelling of the same story. David buys the threshing floor of Ornan the Jebusite. Jebusite, they lived in the city even before David did. He buys that land, and after he buys that land, he says, this is the land where Solomon is going to build the temple. He doesn't say Solomon, but he said, this is where we're going to build the temple. And in chapter 22, we see that he prepares for the temple building on that site. And then Solomon in chapter 22 is the one who's charged to build that temple. So we see that the narrative move quickly, but it goes full circle from the temptation to number the people, to the place where the plague stopped, to the place that David bought, to the collection of materials, to Solomon building the temple on that spot. And we're going to find more out about Solomon later on. But we see here the selective editing of David's life is not falsified. It's not like it's not true. It's just done for a purpose to promote David as a righteous king to compare everybody else to. So I know it's a little complicated, but that kind of deals with some of the criticism the book of Chronicles gets. And hopefully after you read this, you see the chronicler's point in all of this. It's not to hide David's sin. It's just to show that David was overall a righteous king. So anyway, all right, here to John chapter 10. Interesting, after the Feast of Dedication, this is at Hanukkah, wintertime, it says that Jesus is out talking, he's out teaching, and the Jews ask him, are you the Messiah? Just tell us clearly. And Jesus said, I already told you, but you don't believe because you are not of my sheepfold. You're not of my group. You're not of the flock of God, which is very interesting that these Pharisees, they can't believe. They are blind because God has not revealed it to them. That's a principle we see all throughout the Gospel of John, that you can only see if God allows you to see. You can only believe if the Father draws you. Very important principles time and time again here. And as you read chapter 10, you're going to see that. It says, my sheep hear my voice, and I know them. And I give them eternal life, and they will never perish, and no one will snatch them out of my hand. My Father, who's given them to me, even think about that. God the Father has given this group of people to Jesus. So God has selected them, given them to Jesus. Now they're being drawn to Jesus, and no one is able to snatch them out of my hand. And then he says, no one's able to snatch them out of my Father's hand. I and the Father are one. Jesus and God the Father are one. So very important here, and the Jews obviously understand what this means. It means that Jesus is making himself out to be God, and they hate that, again, and they pick up stones to kill him, and Jesus says, hey, what good works have I done that you're killing me for? Is it the miracles, is it healing the blind man? Like, is that why you want to kill me? And they're like, no, not because of the works, but because you're blaspheming. And he's like, no, I do the works of my Father, which show that I am who I say I am, that I am one with the Father, and that I am God myself. And it's super important that he does that. And it says, after all this, they hate him. They run him out of town. He crosses the Jordan. So that's kind of a long trek. He's up on the hill of Jerusalem. He goes down, crosses the Jordan to where John was ministering at the beginning. And he stayed there for a while. And it says, many believed in him there. So while the Pharisees are not a part of the flock of God, and they reject Jesus because of that, there are some people who do believe. And these people who do believe are a part of the flock of God. And as it says, my sheep hear my voice, Jesus said, and I know them and they follow me. If you are part of God's group of people, you know what you're going to do? You are going to follow him. And that's a comfort for us, that no one is able to snatch you or me out of the Father's hand. Super awesome truths that we find today. So thank you for joining us. We'll see you back tomorrow for another daily Bible reading snapshot.